The dying Black Widow pressed a leather pouch of gold coins into the scarred cowboy's weathered palm while her 12-year-old daughter screamed behind her. Dust swirled around the three figures standing in the harsh Arizona sun, carrying with it the whispers of townspeople who had gathered to witness what they called a spectacle. Serafina Caldwell's chest rattled with each breath. Blood had stained her lips that morning, and her hands shook as she pushed Zara toward the stranger. The girl fought like a cornered animal, her small fists striking uselessly against her mother's weakened grip. "Mama, don't sell me like cattle." Zara's voice cracked with betrayal. "Please don't make me go with him." The cowboy stood silent. His face bore scars that spoke of violence, and his dark eyes held secrets that ran deeper than the canyon cuts in the nearby mountains. Half Cherokee blood showed in his high cheekbones and the way he carried himself, separate from the world. Around him, the townspeople kept their distance from Tobias McKenna, though none would say his name aloud. Seraphine's knees buckled. She caught herself against the porch rail of their small ranch house, the same house her husband had built before the mining accident took him 6 months ago. The same house the town council planned to seize the moment she drew her last breath. "This isn't selling, baby girl." Seraphine's words came out broken. "This is saving." The moral weight of the moment pressed down like the desert heat. Every eye in the growing crowd judged her choice, but none of them would take in a half-orphaned colored child. None of them would protect Zara from the workhouse that waited like a hungry beast. The unthinkable consequence of doing nothing loomed, larger than the shame of this desperate bargain. Tobacco McKenna stepped forward. His movements held surprising gentleness despite his intimidating frame. He knelt to Zara's eye level, careful not to reach for her. "Your mama's dying," he said. Quietly, "She's trying to keep you from dying with her." Zara spun toward her mother. "You're not dying. You're just sick. Tell him you're just sick." Seraphine's silence answered what her words could not. The consumption had eaten through her lungs like wildfire through dry grass. 3 days ago she had collapsed while feeding their chickens, and the blood that came up told her everything she needed to know about time. The crowd pressed closer. Mrs. Henderson clutched her shawl and whispered to Mrs. Porter about the impropriety of it all. Mr. Jameson spat tobacco juice into the dirt and shook his head at the sorry sight they made. These were the same people who would vote to take everything from Zara the moment Seraphine's heart stopped beating. Tobacco's horse stamped impatiently behind him. The animal was well fed and well cared for, speaking to its owner's character in ways words never could. His saddle showed wear, but no neglect. His boots were mended but clean. Whatever else he might be, he was not a man who abandoned his responsibilities. "Why would you do this?" Zara demanded, her fear turning to anger. "Why would you buy someone you don't even know?" The cowboy's hand moved instinctively toward his vest pocket, then stopped. Something lived there that he protected more carefully than his own life. His jaw tightened with old pain that had carved permanent lines around his eyes. "Sometimes strangers are safer than family," he said. Serafina watched this exchange with growing certainty that she had made the right choice. 2 days ago, when this scarred cowboy appeared at her door with his impossible offer, she had recognized something in him. Not his face, though it tugged at her memory. Not his voice, though it carried familiar rhythms. Something deeper. Something that spoke to the part of her that had always been able to sense good people hiding beneath rough exteriors. The gold coins felt heavy in Tobacco's palm. More money than most men saw in a year, offered without hesitation for the guardianship of a child he had never met. The mystery of his motivation hung in the air like heat shimmer, bending reality until nothing looked quite as it should. Zara made one last desperate attempt to run. She broke free from her mother's weakened grasp and sprinted toward the house, but her legs gave out after only a few steps. The emotional weight of the moment had drained her strength. She crumpled in the dirt, sobbing with the kind of grief That comes from understanding that childhood is ending whether she was ready or not. Tobacco moved then. He scooped up both mother and daughter, Serafina in one arm and Zara in the other, as if they weighed nothing at all. The crowd murmured its disapproval, but none stepped forward to help. None offered an alternative. They were content to judge without offering solutions. "Where are you taking us?" Serafina whispered against his shoulder. "Somewhere you can die in peace," he answered. "Somewhere she can learn to live." The destination was a mystery, but Serafina felt her racing heart begin to slow. This man knew exactly where he was going. His route had been planned long before today. The careful way he lifted them both, the supplies already loaded. On his horse, the glances he threw toward specific trails leading out of town. None of this was spontaneous. As they moved away from the crowd, Zara's sobs began to quiet. Exhaustion was taking over, but so was something else. The steady rhythm of Tobacco's heartbeat beneath her ear. The careful way he adjusted his grip to keep her comfortable. The low, wordless humming that seemed to come from some deep well of understanding about what it meant to lose everything. The townspeople dispersed slowly, their entertainment over. They returned to their daily lives with new gossip to share and fresh judgment to pass. None would remember that they had just witnessed an act of love disguised as desperation. None would understand that sometimes saving someone requires letting them go. The ranch house grew smaller behind them as Tobacco's horse carried all three toward an uncertain future. Seraphine's breathing grew more labored with each step, but her grip on consciousness remained strong enough to notice the way her daughter had stopped fighting. Zara's hand had found its way to Tobacco's vest pocket, the one he protected so carefully. She did not try to reach inside, but her small palm rested against whatever treasure he kept there. 3 days of planning had led to this moment. 3 days of impossible decisions and desperate prayers. Now they moved forward into whatever came next, bound together by necessity and the thin hope that love could survive even the most heartbreaking choices. 3 days before the desperate exchange, Serafina had collapsed while scattering corn for the chickens. The birds scattered as her knees hit the hard-packed earth, their frightened clucking mixing with the sound of her labored breathing. Blood spotted the dusty ground beneath her lips, bright red against the pale dirt. Zara found her there an hour later. The girl helped her mother to bed without speaking, both of them understanding that something fundamental had changed. The consumption had been gnawing at Seraphine's lungs for months, but this was different. This was the beginning of the end. The town council arrived the next morning like vultures sensing death. 3 men in clean suits stepped carefully around, the chicken droppings in their polished boots. They did not remove their hats when they entered the small house. They did not ask about Seraphine's health. "We need to discuss arrangements," said Councilman Bradley, his pale hands folded across his substantial belly. "For the property, for the child." Serafina sat wrapped in her late husband's coat, the fabric hanging loose on her shrinking frame. She had lost 20 pounds since Thomas died in the mine collapse. The consumption had stolen her appetite, along with her strength. "I'm not dead yet," she said quietly. "But you will be soon." Bradley's certainty cut through the room like winter wind. "The girl can't inherit, you know that. Colored children don't own property in this territory." The words hung in the air between them. Legal truth wrapped in social poison. Zara pressed herself against the wall near the kitchen, listening to her future being decided by men who would not meet her eyes. "There's a workhouse in Tucson," added Councilman Peters, his voice carrying false kindness. "She be fed. She learn useful skills." Serafina knew about the Tucson workhouse. Children went in. Broken adults sometimes came out. The lucky ones died young. "I have family," she lied smoothly. "They'll come for her." The men exchanged glances that said they knew better. If Serafina had family with means, she would not be dying alone in a fallen-down ranch house with chickens pecking at weeds outside her door. "We'll need documentation," Bradley said. "Letters, proof of relationship, financial capability." They left her with 2 weeks to produce miracles. That evening, Serafina lit a candle and pulled out paper and ink she could barely afford. Her hands shook as she wrote, not to imaginary relatives, but to stories she had heard whispered in church circles. Stories about a half-Cherokee cowboy who helped people when the law would not. A man who had lost everything and spent his remaining years trying to balance some cosmic scale of justice. She did not know his real name. She did not know where to find him. She wrote the letters anyway, addressing them to the cowboy who helps, and sending them to trading posts and saloons across 3 territories. Most would never reach their target. But desperate people cast wide nets and hoped for small miracles. 2 days before her collapse, the miracle walked up to her door. Tobias McKenna appeared at sunset, leading his horse and carrying dust from 100 miles of hard travel. He stood in her doorway like an answer to prayers she had been afraid to speak aloud. The scars on his face told stories of violence survived, but his eyes held the kind of gentleness that came from understanding loss. "You wrote to me," he said without preamble. Seraphine's heart hammered against her ribs. She had written to a legend, not expecting flesh and blood to respond. "I don't know you," she whispered, "but I know you." His voice carried certainty that made no sense. "I know what you're facing. I know what you need." He pulled a leather pouch from his coat. Gold coins caught the lamplight, more money than she had seen since Thomas died. More money than most people earned in years of backbreaking work. "I can't pay you back," she said. "I'm not asking you to." The mystery of his motivation filled the small room like smoke. Men did not give away fortunes to strangers without reason. They did not travel hundreds of miles based on desperate letters from dying women they had never met. Serafina studied his face in the flickering candlelight. Something familiar lived in the slope of his shoulders, the way he held his left hand. Slightly curled. Recognition danced at the edges of her memory, but would not come clear. "Why?" she asked. Tobacco's hand moved to his vest pocket, the same gesture he would repeat 3 days later when Zara questioned him. His fingers pressed against something hidden there, something that gave him strength or caused him pain. "Because I failed someone. Once," he said. "I won't fail again." He stayed the night, sleeping on the floor beside the dying fire. Serafina watched him through the darkness, noting the way he startled at small sounds and the careful distance he kept from Zara's sleeping. Form. This was a man carrying wounds that had never properly healed. In the morning, he examined Serafina with the knowledge of someone who had seen death approach before. His fingers found her pulse, measured her breathing, assessed the gray pallor of her skin with clinical detachment. "How long?" she asked. "Days, maybe a week if you rest." "And if I don't rest?" His silence answered everything. They spent that day making plans that felt like surrender. Tobacco knew trails that would keep them hidden from curious eyes. He knew places where a woman could die with dignity while her daughter learned to trust the man who would raise her. His preparation was thorough in ways that spoke of long consideration. "You've been thinking about this," Serafina observed. "For months, before I wrote to you, before you needed to." The mystery deepened with every answer. This man had been planning to help her before she knew she needed help. He had been preparing to save Zara before the girl knew she needed saving. That night, Serafina began writing letters to her daughter. Not explanations of her choice, but gifts to be opened in the future. Instructions for living. Promises that love would survive even when mothers could not. She hid the letters throughout the house, tucked between mattress and frame, folded inside recipe books, pressed between the pages of the Bible Thomas had given her on their wedding day. Breadcrumbs of love for a daughter who would soon be walking alone through a hostile world. On the 3rd morning, the collapse came, the chickens scattered, the blood fell. and the impossible became inevitable. Now as Tobacco's horse carried them away from everything Zara had ever known, Serafina felt peace settling over her exhausted spirit. She had found a way to save her daughter. The cost was heartbreak, but heartbreak was temporary. Death was permanent. Zara rode in silence, her small body pressed against Tobacco's chest. She had stopped crying but had not stopped grieving. Her fingers still rested against his vest pocket, drawn to whatever secret he guarded there. Seraphine's breathing grew more labored with each mile. The consumption was claiming its final victory, but she would not surrender until she was certain. Zara was safe. Love demanded that much. Motherhood required no less. The desert stretched endlessly around them, painted in shades of red and gold by the setting sun. Somewhere ahead lay sanctuary. Somewhere behind lay a life that could never be reclaimed. Between those 2 points, 3 broken people moved toward an uncertain future, bound together by necessity and the fragile hope that sometimes strangers were indeed safer than family. Serafina died on the 3rd night, slipping away while coyotes sang their lonesome songs across the desert. Her last breath came so quietly that Zara almost missed it, curled beside her mother on a bedroll under stars that offered no comfort. The girl's hand had been resting on Seraphine's chest, feeling each labored rise and fall until there were no more. Tobacco sat 20 feet away, feeding mesquite branches to their small fire. He heard the moment when Zara's breathing changed. From sleep to the sharp awareness of loss. The silence that followed told him. Everything. She's gone, Zara whispered to the darkness. Tobacco did not move from his position by the fire. Did not offer empty words about better places or eternal peace. He understood that some grief needed space to breathe before comfort could be accepted. They buried Serafina at dawn in a grave marked by stones Tobacco had gathered while Zara slept. He spoke no words over the makeshift grave, but his lips moved in silent prayer. Zara watched his scarred hands arrange the rocks, with unexpected gentleness, creating something permanent from the scattered debris of the desert floor. "What happens to me now?" she asked when the work was finished. "You live," he said simply. The weight of being completely alone with this stranger settled over Zara like sand blown by relentless wind. She was 12 years old and owned nothing, except the dress on her back and the grief in her heart. This man had paid gold for the right to decide her future, and she had no power to refuse whatever he chose. They rode deeper into country that existed beyond maps and territorial boundaries. Tobacco knew every hidden spring, every cave that offered shelter, every trail that avoided the kind of towns where questions were asked. His knowledge spoke of years spent learning to disappear. On the 2nd day of their journey together, dust clouds appeared on the horizon behind them. Tobacco studied the distant riders through a spyglass that had seen better decades, his weathered face betraying no emotion. But Zara noticed how his hand moved instinctively to the rifle secured beside his saddle. "Are they following us?" she asked. "They're following me." He guided his horse toward rocky ground where hoofprints would be harder to track. His movements held the efficiency of a man who had been hunted before and survived. Every decision was calculated to buy them distance and time. They spent that night in a narrow canyon where the walls blocked most of the starlight. Tobacco built no fire. They ate cold beans from a tin and drank water that tasted of metal and necessity. The darkness pressed close around them, populated by sounds that spoke of predators and prey locked in their eternal dance. Zara watched Tobacco clean his rifle by moonlight. His movements were methodical, almost meditative. Each piece was disassembled, inspected, and reassembled with the care of a man whose life had often depended on mechanical precision. "Who are they?" she asked quietly. "Men who want something I have. What do you have that's worth killing for?" Tobacco's hands stilled on the rifle stock. His eyes found her face in the pale light, measuring how much truth a 12-year-old could carry. "Land," he said finally. And the stubbornness to keep it. The explanation felt incomplete, but Zara sensed that pushing for more would only cause him to retreat further into the silence he wore like armor. She had learned to read the adults in her life, and this man's wounds ran deeper than anything. Inflicted by fists or bullets. They rode hard for 3 more days, staying ahead of their pursuers through Tobacco's knowledge of terrain that seemed designed to swallow travelers whole. The desert tested them with heat that turned metal too hot to touch and cold that bit through wool blankets with hungry teeth. On the 4th day, fever took hold of Zara. It started as weariness that made her sway in the saddle. By midday, she was shivering despite the blazing sun. By evening, she could barely stay conscious long enough to drink the water Tobacco pressed to her lips. He made camp in the ruins of an old mission, stone walls that offered protection from wind and wandering eyes. The fever burned through Zara's small body like wildfire through dry grass, stealing her strength and replacing it with delirium that blurred the line between dreams and waking. Tobacco tended her with skills that spoke of experience with desperate situations. He brewed teas from plants he gathered in the mission's overgrown garden, herbs that had been cultivated by long-dead priests and survived on stubbornness alone. His hands were gentle as they bathed her burning forehead with water cooled in clay jars. In her fever dreams, Zara called out for her mother. She called out for her father, dead these many months. And sometimes, in moments when the illness loosened her hold unconscious thought, she called Tobacco, Papa, in a voice that broke something open in his chest. Each time the word escaped her lips, Tobacco's face twisted with pain that had nothing to do with physical wounds. His hand would still on whatever task occupied him, and he would stare into the middle distance as if seeing ghosts that refused to stay buried. On the 2nd night of her illness, while Zara thrashed in fever sleep, Tobacco spoke to the darkness. "I couldn't save you, Rosalie," he whispered to the empty air. "But maybe I can save her." The name hung in the desert silence, heavy with regret that had been carried across too many miles and through too many sleepless nights. Zara, caught between consciousness and dreams, heard the name and filed it away in the part of her mind that collected mysteries. By the 3rd morning, the fever broke. Zara woke to find Tobacco sitting beside her bedroll, his rifle across his knees and his eyes fixed on the mission's crumbling entrance. Dark circles under his eyes spoke of nights spent standing guard while she fought her private battle with death. "The men who were following us," she asked weakly. "Gone, for now. Will they come back?" Tobacco's silence was answer enough. As Zara's strength slowly returned, she began to notice details that fever had hidden from her. The way Tobacco's left hand trembled slightly when he thought no one was watching. The careful distance he maintained from her, as if afraid that getting too close would cause more pain than either of them could bear. The photograph he protected in his vest pocket, touched but never removed. She began to understand that this man who had rescued her was himself a refugee from something that had broken him in ways that might never heal. They were both orphans now, bound together by circumstances neither had chosen and neither could change. The desert stretched endlessly around the old mission, painted in shades of survival and surrender. Somewhere behind them, dangerous men searched for trails that had been deliberately obscured. Somewhere ahead lay whatever future they could build from the scattered pieces of their separate losses. For now they had shelter, they had water, they had each other's silent company in a world that had proven itself capable of taking away everything that mattered without warning or mercy. Zara fell asleep that night to the sound of Tobacco's quiet voice speaking names into the darkness. Some belonged to the living, some belonged to the dead. All of them belonged to the family he carried in his heart, invisible but never forgotten. Zara found the first letter tucked inside Tobacco's saddlebag while searching for clean bandages for a cut on her hand. The paper was yellowed and creased from multiple readings, the ink faded but still legible in the afternoon light. Her mother's handwriting flowed across the page in careful script that spoke of education earned against long odds. The words stopped Zara's heart. Asterisk Mr. McKenna, I hope this letter finds you well. I have heard stories about your kindness to children in desperate circumstances. My daughter Zara will soon need protection that I cannot provide. The consumption is winning, and when it takes me, she will have no one. I am writing to ask if you might consider helping her when that time comes. I can offer little in return, except a mother's eternal gratitude. Asterisk. The letter was dated 3 months before tobacco had appeared at their door. 3 months before the desperate exchange that Zara had believed was spontaneous desperation. Her hands shook as she read the careful words her mother had crafted while she slept, unaware that her future was being negotiated in secret correspondence. Tobacco found her there 20 minutes later, holding the evidence of betrayal in trembling fingers. His face went still when he saw what she had discovered. No surprise, no anger, just the quiet resignation of a man whose secrets had always been destined to surface. You knew, Zara said. You both knew this was going to happen. Your mother knew she was dying. I knew I could help, but you let me think I was being sold. You let me believe my mama gave me away because she had no choice. Tobacco settled onto a fallen log that had been serving as their bench. His movements held the weariness of someone who had carried too many hard truths for too many years. She did have no choice, he said quietly. Neither did I. What does that mean? It means some debts can only be paid by helping someone else. The mystery deepened instead of clearing. Every answer Tobacco gave raised new questions that he seemed determined not to address. Zara folded the letter carefully, memorizing every word before handing it back to him. You both lied to me, she said. I wasn't sold. I was given away like a burden nobody wanted to carry. Tobacco's jaw tightened. His hand moved to his vest pocket, pressing against the photograph he guarded so carefully. The gesture had become as familiar as breathing, a reflex triggered by emotional pain. Your mama loved you enough to find the one person who would die before letting harm come to you, he said. If that feels like being unwanted, then you don't understand love yet. Then explain it to me. Tell me why a stranger would travel hundreds of miles to help someone he's never met. Tell me why you carry that picture like your life depends on it. Tell me who Rosalie was. The name hit Tobacco harder than a physical blow. Color drained from his weathered face, leaving behind the gray pallor of old grief. His hand stilled against his vest pocket. No longer seeking comfort, but protecting against further damage. How do you know that name? You said it while I was sick. You were talking to someone who wasn't there. Tobacco stood abruptly, pacing toward the edge of their camp where the desert stretched endlessly under the afternoon sun. His shoulders carried the weight of memories that had been growing heavier with each passing year. She was my daughter, he said without turning around. The words fell into the space between them like stones dropped into still water. Zara felt the ripples of that revelation spreading through everything she thought she understood about their situation. Where is she now? Dead 5 years now. How? Tobacco's silence stretched until Zara thought he would not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the flat tone of someone reciting facts too painful for emotion. I was in prison, wrongly convicted of stealing cattle that belonged to a man who wanted my land. She was put in a workhouse while I fought to prove my innocence. By the time I got out, she was gone. The pieces began falling into place. The careful way Tobacco approached her during her illness. The pain that flickered across his face when she called him Papa in her delirium. The determination to help a child he had never met escape the same fate that had claimed his own daughter. That's why you helped me, Zara said. Because you couldn't help her. I failed her. I won't fail you. But how did Mama know to write to you? How did she know you existed? Tobacco turned back toward her, and for the first time since she had known him, his carefully maintained composure cracked. Raw pain showed through the gaps, The kind of agony that came from losses that could never be recovered. Because I've been helping children like you for 5 years. Ever since I buried Rosalie. Word gets around about a man who pays to keep kids out of workhouses. The revelation hit Zara harder than discovering the letters. This man had been rescuing children across 3 territories, spending his own money and risking his own safety to save others from the fate that had claimed his daughter. She was not special, she was not chosen. She was simply the latest in a long line of desperate cases. How many? She asked. 17, counting you. Where are they now? Safe, with families who wanted them. In schools back east. A few old enough to make their own way. He paused. All of them alive, all of them free. The scope of his mission staggered her. 17 children saved from workhouses, abusive relatives, or simple abandonment. 17 lives purchased with gold that must have cost him everything he owned. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to grieve your mother first. You needed to be angry at someone safe before you could start healing. The wisdom of that approach began to make sense. Anger at tobacco had been easier to carry than the crushing weight of loss. Feeling betrayed by a stranger had been less devastating than accepting that her mother was truly gone. Dust clouds appeared on the horizon while they sat in the shadow of new understanding. Tobacco spotted them first, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle that was never far from reach. The peaceful moment shattered as survival instincts took precedence over emotional revelation. The men who were following us, Zara said. They found our trail. Tobacco moved with practiced efficiency, gathering their scattered possessions and preparing for flight. But something had changed between them during their conversation. The wariness that had defined their relationship was softening into something that might eventually become trust. Who are they really? Zara asked as they prepared to run again. Men who work for a rancher named Morrison. He wants the land I inherited from my wife. Your wife? She died while I was in prison. Consumption. Just like your mother. Another piece of the puzzle, offered without prompting. Tobacco was beginning to trust her with the truth, painful as it was. Zara filed away the information, sensing that more revelations were coming. They mounted his horse and rode toward Broken, country where pursuers would have trouble following. Behind them, the dust clouds grew larger. Ahead lay whatever safety they could find in a landscape that seemed designed to test human endurance. But something fundamental had shifted between them. Zara no longer felt like cargo being transported by a reluctant guardian. She felt like someone worth saving, someone worth the risk Tobacco was taking by protecting her. The mystery of their connection remained unsolved, but she sensed that answers were coming. The photograph in his vest pocket still held secrets. The land he fought to protect carried significance beyond simple ownership. And somewhere in the careful way he said her mother's name was a familiarity that suggested their meeting had been less random than either had admitted. For now, survival took precedence over curiosity. But Zara promised herself that when they found safety again, she would uncover the truth about why Tobacco McKenna had risked everything to save her. The abandoned mission where they made their final stand had been crumbling for decades. Adobe walls bore the scars of desert storms and human neglect, but the structure still offered protection from 3 sides. Tobacco positioned himself where he could see the only approach, his rifle steady against a fallen beam. 5 riders emerged from the heat shimmer like vengeful spirits. Their leader wore a tin star that caught the afternoon light, but his authority came from the Winchester across his saddle rather than any legal appointment. Deputy Morrison rode with the confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. "McKenna," Morrison called across the courtyard, "you've led us a fine chase." Tobacco did not respond. His finger rested light on the trigger, measuring distances and calculating odds that did not favor survival. Behind him, Zara crouched in the shadow of a broken altar, her heart hammering against her ribs. My uncle sent me to make you an offer, Morrison continued. Sign over the land and we'll let you right away, the girl too. Your uncle's offers aren't worth the paper they're written on. Morrison's laugh carried no humor. The paper says, you murdered a man in Tucson last year. Says there's $1,000 reward for bringing you in, dead or alive. The lie hung in the desert air like poison. Zara saw Tobacco's jaw tighten, but his rifle never wavered. Whatever crimes Morrison's family had invented to justify their pursuit, denying them would waste breath better used for breathing. Last chance, McKenna. Sign the deed, or we take it off your corpse. Then you'll have to come get it. Morrison's patience evaporated like water on hot stone. He gestured to his men, and they began spreading out to surround the mission. Their movements held the practiced coordination of predators who had cornered prey before. In the terrible silence that followed, Tobacco spoke without turning away. From his targets, Zara, there's something you need to know. About why your mother trusted me. About why I came when she called. Now? Fear made her voice crack. You want to tell me now? Because there might not be later. A gunshot split the air. Morrison's bullet chipped adobe inches from Tobacco's head, sending dust cascading onto his shoulders. The time for talking was ending whether they were ready or not. Your mother's sister was named Elizabeth, Tobacco said quickly, adjusting his aim. She was my wife. That makes you my niece, not just some stranger I decided to help. The words hit Zara harder then. The gunfire echoing off the mission walls. Family, not charity. Not some elaborate form of penance for past failures. Blood connection that explained everything she had not understood about their relationship. Elizabeth died of consumption while I was in prison, Tobacco continued, his voice steady despite the bullets whining overhead. Rosalie died in the workhouse because I wasn't there to protect her. When your mother wrote to me, I knew I couldn't fail family again. Another shot. This one closer. Morrison's men were finding their range, using the desert heat and broken walls to mask their positions. Tobacco returned fire, his bullet sending one attacker diving for cover behind a cactus that offered more hope than protection. Why didn't you tell me? Zara asked. Because you needed to choose me for who I am, not because we share blood. Family that's forced isn't family at all. The logic of his silence began to make sense. Love had to be earned, not inherited. Trust had to be built through actions, not assumed because of shared ancestors. He had let her see his character before revealing their connection. The photograph, she said suddenly. In your pocket. Tobacco reached into his vest with his free hand, pulling out the worn image he had protected for so long. He tossed it back to her without looking away from his rifle sights. Zara caught the photograph and turned it over in trembling fingers. Two images, just as she had suspected. The first showed a mixed-race girl about her own age, with Tobacco's dark eyes and gentle smile. Rosalie, the daughter he had failed to save. The second photograph, hidden behind the first, showed a wedding. Tobacco stood beside a woman whose face was startlingly familiar. The same high cheekbones that Zara saw in her mirror every morning. The same determined set to her jaw that had carried Serafina through years of hardship. Elizabeth, her father's sister. The aunt she had never known existed. Mama knew, Zara whispered. She knew who you were when she wrote those letters. She knew I was Elizabeth's husband. She knew I had failed one family and would die before failing another. Morrison's voice cut through the afternoon heat. Time's up, McKenna. Come out with your hands visible, or we're coming in. Tobacco's response was another carefully aimed shot that sent Morrison scrambling for better cover. The negotiation phase was over. What came next would be settled with lead and determination. If something happens to me, Tobacco said quietly, there's a letter in my saddlebag. It explains everything. Where to find the deed to my land, who to trust in town, how to contact the families of the other children I've helped. Nothing's going to happen to you. Maybe not. But if it does, you'll know what to do. The final assault came at sunset, when the light favored the defenders and made the attackers visible against the orange sky. Morrison's men rushed the mission from 3 sides, their boots kicking up dust clouds that marked their positions. Tobacco's rifle spoke with methodical precision, not to kill, but to wound and discourage. Men who came for easy money rarely stayed when the cost became personal. 2 attackers fell back, clutching injuries that would heal but not quickly. Morrison himself appeared in the main doorway, his pistol drawn and his face twisted with frustration. He had expected an easy victory over a lone man and child. Instead, he had found a defender who understood both tactics and desperation. "You can't hold out forever," Morrison snarled. "Don't need forever," Tobacco replied. "Just need long enough." "Long enough for what?" "For you to realize this land isn't worth dying for." Morrison's hesitation lasted only a moment, but it was enough. Tobacco's next shot knocked the pistol from his hand, sending it spinning across the mission floor. The deputy stumbled backward, cradling his numbed fingers and reassessing the situation. "This isn't over," Morrison called as he retreated. "Yes, it is," Tobacco said quietly. "Because now she knows who she is, and family doesn't run from family." Zara looked at the photographs in her hands, then at the man who had risked everything to save her. Uncle, guardian, the last connection to a father she had never known, and an aunt who had died protecting the land that should have been her inheritance. The sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Morrison's men were riding away, defeated by determination and the simple truth that some things were worth more than money. In the gathering darkness, Zara and Tobacco began planning their return to the world of laws and legal documents. They had land to reclaim, a family legacy to restore, and a future to build from the scattered pieces of 2 broken lives. The mission walls had sheltered them through their darkest hour. Now they would shelter the truth that had finally found its way into the light. 3 weeks after the confrontation at the mission, Tobacco stood in the doorway of Sheriff Coleman's office with the deed to his land in one weathered hand and Zara's small fingers gripped tight in the other. The sheriff was an honest man in a territory where honesty was rarer than water in drought season. His gray mustache twitched as he examined the legal documents that proved Morrison's family had been trying to steal what was never theirs. "This deed's legitimate," Coleman said finally. "Filed proper in Santa Fe 5 years back. Morrison's been lying through his teeth about having any claim to your property." Tobacco nodded but said nothing. Legal vindication felt hollow after years of running from manufactured crimes and invented debts. Justice was a luxury he had learned not to expect. Zara watched the sheriff's face carefully. She had developed the ability to read adults quickly, a survival skill learned from watching her mother navigate a world that offered few protections for people who looked like them. "There's something else," Coleman continued. "Morrison's uncle died last month. Heart gave out. His nephews are fighting over what's left of his holdings, and none of them want to keep chasing ghosts across the territory. So we're free to go." "Home?" Zara asked. "You're free to go wherever you please, miss." The word home carried weight that pressed against Tobacco's chest. Home had been a place he shared with Elizabeth and Rosalie before prison stole his family and left him with nothing but guilt and empty rooms. Now home would be something different, something built on choice rather than loss. They rode toward the land that afternoon, following trails Tobacco had not traveled since the day he buried his wife. The property sat in a valley where cottonwoods grew thick along a creek that ran year-round. Good water, good soil, the kind of place where a man could build something that would last beyond his own lifetime. The house Elizabeth had loved stood empty but intact. Desert mice had moved into the corners, and dust covered everything with the fine patina of abandonment, but the bones were solid. The foundation had been built to endure whatever the territory could throw at it. Zara walked through the rooms slowly, her footsteps echoing in spaces that waited to be filled with life again. She paused at a window that looked out over the creek, imagining her aunt standing in this same spot, watching the water flow past while dreaming of children who would play in its shallows. She wanted kids, Tobacco said from the doorway. Elizabeth. We tried for years before Rosalie came to live with us. Rosalie wasn't your daughter by blood. Her mother died when she was 7. Elizabeth's sister, just like your mama was Elizabeth's sister. We took her in because family doesn't abandon family. The pattern repeated itself across generations. Sisters dying young, children left behind. And Tobacco, standing in the gap between loss and hope, trying to keep families whole when death worked so hard to tear them apart. Will you show me their graves? Zara asked. They walked to the small cemetery Tobacco had carved from rocky ground. Behind the house, 2 headstones stood side by side, weathered but readable. Elizabeth McKenna, beloved wife. Rosalie McKenna, beloved daughter. Simple words that carried the weight of lives cut too short. Tobacco knelt and pulled weeds that had grown around the markers. His hands moved with the reverence of a man who understood that tending the dead was one way of honoring the living. Zara joined him without being asked, her small fingers gentle on the carved stone that bore Rosalie's name. I used to think she'd want me to join her, Tobacco said quietly. Seemed easier than figuring out how to live without them. What changed your mind? The first child I helped. A boy in Tucson whose father died in a saloon fight. When I saw him safe with a family who wanted him, I understood that maybe Rosalie and Elizabeth weren't done with me yet. Maybe they were, sending me work to do. The sun was setting by the time they finished clearing the graves. Orange light painted the valley in shades of warmth and promise. This was land worth fighting for, worth building on, worth passing down to someone who would understand its value. There's something I need to ask you, Tobacco said as they walked back toward the house. About what happens next. Zara felt her stomach clench with familiar fear. Another choice, made for her by adults who knew what was best. Another uprooting just when she was beginning to feel settled. I could take you to your mother's people in California, he continued. Give you a chance at a normal life with folks who'd understand where you come from. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. What matters is what's best for you. Zara stopped walking and turned to face him. At 12 years old, she had already learned that life rarely offered perfect choices, but sometimes it offered true ones. I want to stay here, with you, if you'll have me. It won't be easy. This territory's hard on everyone, but especially on families that don't look like what folks expect. Mama raised me to be strong. You've shown me how to be smart. Between the two of you, I think I can handle whatever comes. Tobacco's weathered face cracked into the first genuine smile she had seen from him. Not the careful expression he wore when being polite, but real joy breaking through years of accumulated grief. Then we'd better get started, he said. This place won't fix itself. 6 months later, the house had been transformed from an empty shell into a home that hummed with quiet purpose. Zara tended a garden where vegetables grew beside wildflowers she had planted on impulse. Tobacco repaired fences and broke horses with the patience of a man who had found reasons to plan for the future. The 17 other children he had rescued sent letters occasionally, reporting on their progress in schools and adoptive families across 3 territories. Each letter was filed carefully in a wooden box that sat on the kitchen table, proof that some debts could be paid forward instead of backward. On quiet evenings, Zara would find Tobacco sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over land that belonged to them both now. The photographs of Elizabeth and Rosalie sat on the mantel inside, but they no longer seemed to accuse him of surviving when they could not. Now they seemed to bless the new family he was building from choice rather than obligation. When visitors asked about their relationship, Zara had developed an answer that satisfied curiosity without inviting judgment. "He didn't buy me," she would say with the quiet dignity her mother had taught her. "He chose me, and I chose him back." The simple truth of mutual selection carried more weight than blood or law or social expectation. Family was what you built with daily acts of love and trust. Everything else was just paperwork. The desert around their valley bloomed each spring with flowers that lasted only days before withering in the heat. But their roots went deep, and they always returned when conditions were right. Some things endured not because they were strong, but because they knew how to survive until survival became something more. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, and if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.